Pleasure to introduce the opening panel discussion of the conference. And this one is entitled The Data Leader Journey, Building a Long-Term Data Strategy. So we're very pleased to have information builders supporting this first discussion, and it will be moderated by Chris Banks from Information Builders. You may have seen that Pamela Snively from TELUS Communications was due to take part, but unfortunately, due to a last-minute personal issue, she's no longer able to join us. But we do still have two excellent panelists in Jennifer and Adele, who will be joining Chris for the conversation. So I'm sure it'll be a very interesting one. With that, I will remind you, you can submit questions throughout. I will step aside and I will hand things over to Chris as our moderator. Hi, Chris.
Hi, James, and thank you and welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure to be joining you here today virtually, right? New things have changed in the world, and we're all doing these rather than doing live events. But this is a really good topic and something that's very near and dear to my heart. As James mentioned, I work for Information Builders. We are a leading data and analytics software vendor who basically embeds intelligence pretty much into everything in every industry. So we work with a lot of organizations, big and small, and we make trusted data easy to access and analytics easy to create and easy to consume. And that's about it about Information Builders for now. Joining us today are two great panelists, and I'm going to give them the opportunity right now to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Adele. Adele?
Hi, thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here today to actually speak with Chris, participate in this panel discussion with Chris and Jennifer. I'm the Vice President of Data Enablement and Analytics for a firm called BentallGreenOak. We're a division of Sun Life. We actually are investment managers, and the asset class we deal with is real estate, commercial real estate. I lead up the data and analytics team at BentallGreenOak with the key responsibilities of making the data accessible to not only our portfolio managers, but to our real estate services officers, making that trusted data available, helping the organization to really enhance our capability and through decision-making with that data, as well as support and at times drive some innovation within the organization. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Adele. And Jennifer, how about yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Also a pleasure to be here today. My name is Jennifer Gibbs, and I run the Global Chief Data Office for TD Bank Group. Hopefully this is, being a Canadian audience, you know TD Bank, but I will share a couple tidbits of info. We are headquartered in Toronto, Canada, and we have over 85,000 employees and over 26 million customers globally. We also have quite a large footprint in the eastern seaboard of the US. And we have three key business lines: Canadian retail, US retail, and wholesale banking. I'm specifically responsible for, and my team, for developing and overseeing TD's enterprise data policies and standards. So we focus on supporting and driving our data strategy across the bank, driving increased value for our customers through data and analytics. And also specific accountability of mine is to make sure that we are maintaining our customer trust and managing risks appropriately as we are driving value for them through data and analytics.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have the easy part, right? I get to ask you two questions. And before I even start, one of the things that I love to reference, and I'm going to reference it now, is a McKinsey & Company report that came out a little over a year ago. And it talked about the trillions of dollars worth of value that you can tap into with data and analytics. And it came down to three key areas. One was an alignment on strategy. The other one is the right foundation of data, people, and technology. And then the third one was embedding analytics into the processes that you've got inside your organization. And the companies and organizations that leverage this and outshine everybody in those three unique areas, they call them breakaway companies. So I'm going to come back to that probably throughout the presentation, because I find it so fascinating when you do talk to organizations that get it, that understand the value of data and analytics and are really tapping into that. So that being said, 2020 has been an interesting year for all of us, right? To say the least. And how do you think, it's a two-part question, and the first one is, how do you think the role of data and analytic leaders will evolve, especially into 2021. And then the second part is, what steps do we need to take in order to survive, but also to thrive and succeed in 2021? So why don't we start with Adele? Adele, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, has this not been the year of change? And so why should we not think that the role of data is going to change? But, you know, it's really about the journey of data, and it sort of parallels the changes with technology and capability. And so, you know, in the beginning, you know, that role of data and the data leader was about sort of getting the house in order, so to speak, and that data foundational piece. So focusing on the data organization, that stewardship roles, getting the policies, or what I refer to as the rules of engagement, in place, so people know how to act with, or how to deal with data, and starting to make that internal data set, a lot of that structured data set, now available to the internal clients. And that's sort of table stakes. That's kind of sort of the start of where we're at. And there's a lot of effort and investment required to actually get those structures in place and get that data there. Bring in, you know, this crisis that has impacted us. And then in addition to that, the rapid move to more digital capability. And we're certainly seeing it within our buildings, for example, a lot more touchless type of capabilities that are requiring it. So that's now pushing sort of the evolution of that role to be more of that business sort of strategist in there. And it's really leading that data piece of it. So, you know, you implemented the foundational pieces. Now you want to start to drive the value. And coming into play are those data and analytics, and even some of the new data capabilities. There's new data sources that are being created on a daily basis that requires you know, flexibility and agility within the organizations to kind of figure out what that data is and how do we use it. So this role is really one that needs to be very fluid and dynamic and change with sort of what's happening in the data lens, in the data environment, to be able to support the business, to continue to sort of drive some of the value pieces in there in terms of the data piece. And there's really two parts that I'm starting to see now. One is that leveraging the data and the analytics. How do we drive the value? How do we generate insights? How do we support and augment today what we've been doing for years? And then it's that new data set that's going to be coming in that's going to be interesting to sort of help us figure out how do we navigate and sort of move forward. And that data role needs to sort of have that visionary role and really partner and drive some of the business, because it has the opportunity to be a real impactful leader in organizations. So I see that as the evolution.
Awesome. Love your answer. Jennifer, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding my head vigorously at Adele because it all resonates really strongly with me as well. And I think it's interesting when you do look at this as a journey. My experience in the data space for the last many years is the last 4 or 5 years, it's been a constant change and evolution. And I think about all of the progress, even just that we've made in the bank over the last 4 years, and it's actually been incredible. It's been a whirlwind since I joined 4 years ago. And so with what's been happening in 2020, I would say it's accelerating the expansion of the data community and the digital community, both in terms of our internal resources as well as our customers. A lot of customers are now moving into a digital world where before they may have decided not to, and they were left with little choices during the pandemic. And so we've got a lot of movement of customers into a digital world, wondering what's happening with their data. And then internally, you've got a lot of employees and teams who have had to make significant adjustments in a very, very rapid pace. So for me, being in the data space, it's always felt pretty rapid, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of things that you have to be looking ahead for. And so I've actually felt like as much as there's been a lot of challenges around what's been happening in 2020, that from a data perspective, it's shone a light on it, and it's expanding who I think is part of the community. So for me, and when I look at data and analytics leaders, it started with very kind of targeted leadership and subject matter expertise and very focused teams. And now what we're starting to see is that business leaders are becoming data and analytics leaders. And so you've got those targeted data and analytics experienced leaders. And one of the key things that that will be important for them to do is to build up other leaders in the organization to understand data and analytics, to help them realize within their business strategies where data and analytics will play a role. So I think coming into the 2020s, that data and analytics leader will now play a stronger role building up other leadership within the organization in order to take advantage of where we're at. And the second thing I would say that has always been important but will become even more important going forward is to not be naive about what the data ecosystem is. And it's expanding dramatically. Who we're sharing data with, who's asking for our data, the data that we have available to us. As Adele said, I still think there's a lot of work to do foundationally on the quality of the data and how it's understood for sure, but we've been investing there. And now what's happening is the ecosystem is large. And so internal players are going to have to figure out a way to share and use each other's data in a much more efficient, effective manner, which I'd say we've already been down the path for quite some time. But then on top of that, how do we play externally with other people who are sharing or using data, and how do we do that in a way that's clear for our customers? So there's a lot to think about from a leadership perspective in terms of the role that we need to play internally with our partners and externally with other data vendors.
Awesome. Great answer on that. And I love the fact that you're bringing in the customers into that, right? Because net, the customer experience and our customers and keeping existing customers and growing that base is really what drives every organization. And that's something that some organizations kind of forget about, right? And the customer experience is so important. So keeping with this strategic thinking, I've got another two-parter for you. How did you develop your strategy around data and analytics? And what were some of the key goals that you had around that? And why don't we start with you, Jennifer?
Sure, and I think Adele touched on this a little bit too as she was describing kind of the journey, right? Because I think we're probably all at different parts of the journey, but it's sort of similar. For us, it was really important that our data and analytics journey was focused on the customer and focused on strategic business value. And so we've had many data projects and investments for many years. Being a bank, there's a lot of regulatory driven investments in data, as you can imagine. But when we looked at our data strategy specifically, it was around how do we accelerate value for our customers? How do we keep them at the center of what we're doing? And developed a vision to be a data-driven organization. And so although the way in which we implement the strategy and what our priorities and our focus was has certainly changed, as it should with such a rapidly evolving space, keeping the customer at the center has remained, and our vision to be a data-driven organization has remained. And so for us, we started with people and culture, and how do we set up this as a practice and as a focus area that works within our culture. We are generally a very federated bank. We have many different diverse business lines. And so we wanted to make sure that the way in which we engaged the organization was aligned to that culture. And we also started with people, so roles and responsibilities and accountabilities, and what are the basic capabilities we need to focus on and invest in. And so at the beginning, it was about building out the data community, building out the roles and responsibilities, and then understanding what other core capabilities we needed to focus on, which generally were around data governance, data management, and analytics. To expand the data community, we started to extend expectations around how the broad used and leveraged data. And then lastly, I would say we then implemented a top-down approach where we have data as one of our key priorities. And now a lot of the work that we do is data-driven as well. So we have value targets for our lines of business to help accelerate our strategy. And so we've always had kind of a center-focused, consistent approach to data and analytics, and then a strong partnership across the bank to bring them in and help them align to the data strategy. So that's sort of a quick picture of sort of our strategy's always been centered on the customer. It's always been centered on value for them and trust for them. But it's been implemented, the implementation of it has changed throughout, and we've had to be very purposeful in how we scoped out our efforts along the way.
So I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I'm actually a customer of TD Bank, and I live in New York, and that's why I was laughing when you first introduced yourself, saying, you know, around Canada, and then you're in the Eastern Seaboard. You're very well known here in New York, and one of the reasons why my wife and I switched over to TD Bank was the customer service. So you're doing a great job, so be aware of that.
That's
Adele,
great. I love it. Love the plug.
Little plug. I'm going to make it worse, right? And I'm not going to tell you who our bank was at the time. My wife has her own business, and it was for the business that we were doing our banking. And it was a small mom and pop bank out in New York in Long Island. And across the street, a TD Bank opened up. And the irony was that this small mom and pop bank, they had no online banking. And I was looking at my wife, and she was looking at me. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I said, well, TD Bank is right there. And then we've run with it since then. So anyway, a little plug for you guys. Adele, how about yourself?
Well, Jennifer did a great job answering it. And I think what's nice about having Jennifer and I is we have different perspectives. So, you know, I work for a commercial real estate firm, investment manager in properties. So when I think of our major source of data, it's IoT data coming from the building. And also the maturity of this industry compared to the financial industries is like night and day. So, you know, the strategy for me coming in was to really understand where my starting point was. So really getting pretty comfortable with the maturity assessment of the organization, where it stood in its capabilities. And that allowed me to start to build out the plan. And I tied it to really important to the strategy, or really the key goals of the business, because data is used extensively in commercial real estate. But it's used very traditionally with traditional KPIs and sort of type of reporting. And there's a lot of manual sort of efforts as opposed to a lot of the digital or more of the technology. So in terms of how you move forward, it was really sort of evaluating where the organization was, identifying, you know, how to move forward, sort of the short term, long term, medium term, and then tying it ultimately to the business drivers. And that was the key to get business and leaders engaged to it, to get them excited about this space. It wasn't new, but you know, we had to compete with a lot of other priorities. So it was about trying to deliver value in ways that we could while we started to implement the foundational data pieces. So it was really quite a balancing act to, you know, to identify what the key data sources that were a priority for our leaders, and then make that the priority from the business strategy. The other big component in terms of the strategy and how to move forward was a significant sort of effort on the communication and education. So, typically in organizations that may not be high on the maturity scale, data is often thought to be a technology issue. So not a lot of thought goes into it. Somebody just thinks you push the magic button and there should be a report. So there's not a lot of thought and focus about, well, no, we need to think about what data is important so that we can manage it, sort of govern it in the appropriate way. The other interesting piece that I would add is the building side. So, our core asset of information happens to be our physical buildings because they generate a lot of data. Our clients tend to be the tenants that are in those buildings, and those are one of the two core foundational pieces of data that are very different. And so, part of this new space of IoT data is actually understanding what data is in the building and what is accessible, what should we bring in, how do we bring it in. So it just introduced a whole new dimensions of complexity to sort of think through. But the power of the data in the buildings helps us understand what's happening in the building so that we can actually support our tenants. And in this crisis, it's become so critical to actually get that data to help support our tenants, to help ensure that we have a healthy building and to build that trust with our tenants so they feel safe in coming back into the premise. This crisis alone has actually opened up and sort of brought to the forefront how important the data is to the business. So that's been an interesting sort of outcome of this crisis.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's funny. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Chris. I was just going to say that I really appreciated Adele's comments about training and investing in training and communication and change management has been enormously valuable. And I don't know that we would have made the progress we've made if we didn't invest in that significantly all along the way. And it's not to be underestimated for sure. And just another comment also Adele mentioned is the importance of having a means to benchmark yourself against the industry peers and even non-traditional competitors in this space, and having a sense for, are we making progress? Because many of us are venturing down a path that hasn't been formed yet, and some of us are at different points in the path. And how do you articulate to the board or to senior executives, like, are we where we need to be? Because there's so much more to always do. And so having maturity assessments and some way of benchmarking along the way was hugely valuable for us.
It also can act as a good motivator if you benchmark and you sort of come in underneath your peers. So that could also be a good motivator.
That's helpful for sure,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love the fact, as a software vendor, we talk a good game and we're always talking about data and IoT and real-time batch. But when you're hearing somebody that's actually doing it and doing it for the good of your tenants, right, and creating a safe environment, that's awesome. That is just awesome.
Yeah.
And you really have adapted, right, under the current situation, which leads us, ladies, to the next question. Right. So having a strategic approach is certainly important, and it's critical for every organization. Having a strategy, getting all your key stakeholders aligned on that strategy. But this year, right, has been crazy for everybody. Just the fact that we're not doing this live in front of an audience right now. We're doing it virtually and everybody's adapting. But how do you ensure for your organizations that you can remain flexible and being able to adapt to any changes, any priorities, any of the goals for the bigger business? How do you navigate with that? How do you adapt to that as things change? Why don't we start with Jennifer?
So as I mentioned before, although 2020 has significantly accelerated the change and certainly included a lot more of the community of customers and employees in this change, I feel like the data space has been a bit of a whirlwind this entire time. And so my first thing I would always say when you're trying to make progress in times of uncertainty is to invest in your culture and in your people. And so making sure that you've got recruiting practices in place and training in place and structures in place that allow you to be flexible, that focus on innovation, that focus on being iterative and learning as you go, and also being transparent, both within your teams, but also with your key stakeholders, and making sure you're providing support. So there has been incredible stories, certainly within our bank, and I know from other companies, of teams coming together in very new, innovative, creative ways. But even before 2020, whenever we bring people into the Chief Data Office, one of the things I really make sure I vet with people is, are you comfortable in craziness? Are you comfortable with a little bit of organized chaos? And again, we're at a bank, so it's not like we're not unhinged in any way, shape, or form, but we're certainly developing policies and guidance that aren't necessarily out there yet, and we haven't quite done them before. And so it's going to be a learning process, and we have to jump in and keep moving it forward as thoughtfully as possible. So making sure that you are have a very diverse team as well that can bring different lines of thinking to what you're trying to get done is important. So I would say it's even more important, but it's always been important in the data space to make sure you invest in creating a culture that is resilient, that is iterative, that is transparent. So if things don't look right, or there's a better way to do it, that people feel comfortable speaking up. And kind of related to this is developing that same relationship with your key stakeholders. So our accountability is for all the lines of business across the bank, very diverse businesses, diverse personalities. And so we try to create a relationship with our stakeholders that is open and transparent, that I can put myself in their shoes by listening, and that they understand I have an accountability to manage and mitigate risks related to data on behalf of our customers too. And so we can have that open back and forth to try and find the right place to land. And then lastly, I would say it's also really important to have a set of values and principles to go back to, because when things shift really rapidly and the uncertainty is increasing, there should be some foundational principles or values or guidance that, regardless of what's going on around, that you come back to. And so for us, it's let's keep the customer at the center, both our external and our internal customers. And it also helps provide a mechanism to have that, what I call purposeful friction between risk and reward, and having those open discussions with some structure around them, so they can be done a little bit more efficiently. So those are the two things for me, which is around people, culture, and then also having a set of principles to guide you no matter what's going on around you.
I love it. And I love the fact that you're, keep the customer in the center. That's awesome. That's awesome. And it shows. It shows as a customer of yours. Adele, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jennifer just provided a great response to the question. I mean, what I would add to it is, I just extend actually what Jennifer said, and that is this role and sort of this crisis. I mean, from our perspective in this industry, from the beginning of the crisis when it affected in Canada in March to where we're at today, the change that occurred in that short time frame was significant in terms of how we had to adjust and deal with the requirements, the needs coming from our stakeholders. So I think what it really meant was if you don't have the foundational pieces in place, and a lot of those Jennifer mentioned, you as an individual have to be very comfortable with the unknown, and you have to have the confidence that tomorrow is a new day, but we're going to make it through, and to be resilient enough to know that you've got the pieces in place that allow you to adjust and to navigate going forward. And that, to me, is the solitude in here. We never have all the answers, and that's been here since the beginning of time. But what we can do is work very well and effectively as team and kind of deal with the changes that are occurring. And so, being agile, being resilient, that confidence, being comfortable with the unknown, And I think, you know, when you're in the data space, you always have to be comfortable with the purposeful friction, which I kind of like that label that Jennifer used, because it's so true. Because we are, and sometimes you have to push forward knowing that the truth, not a lot of stakeholders may not like the outcome or the truth, but it's the right thing to do, the right thing for the customer, the right thing for the organization in terms of moving it forward. And as long as that's part of your North Star in terms of keeping sort of that integrity, the sort of the goal of what you're trying to achieve, that's kind of where you're going to drive the confidence from. But like every crisis, a crisis actually reinforces all of this. It forces you to kind of go back to the basics, to kind of focus on what you need to do. You got to work together as a team, good communication skills all around. And sometimes it's okay to kind of throw your hands up in the air and go, you know what, today I lost against the crazies won. And that's okay. It's not every day is going to be, and like it was, you know, you got everything on your list done, or, you know, you kind of feel like you achieved, you know, a good day's of work. I mean, it's just not, that's not reality, especially in the data space.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. You know, and I think it's key, right? Organizations need to understand you have to create a culture of accountability, right? Because at the end of the day, and expose that to everybody. And that's just going to make everybody work harder and achieve the bottom line that we're looking to achieve. Awesome job so far, ladies. Now I'm going to throw some curveballs at you. So buckle up. We're going to go to, we have a couple of questions from the audience. How about that?
Awesome.
Which is awesome. So we've got Kirthi, and I apologize if I do not pronounce your name right. I'm just going to pronounce first names because I don't even try to pronounce your last name, Kirthi, but from Simon Fraser University, asked the following question. Does data drive business decisions in financial institutions, or do business decisions reflect the data source that should be used? How's that? That's a thinker right there. So why don't we start with Jennifer?
That's a great question. I would say that, I mean, data has been used extensively in financial services for many, many, many years, and that the extent to which the data is driving decisions has probably changed and shifted over the years, and certainly more and more and more is being driven by data. I think your comment about data sources is really insightful in that, and that's part of this journey we're on in terms of our data strategy, which is evaluating much more strategically, where is the data coming from? Is that the best place for the data to be coming from? How can I connect that data with other sources of data to bring me greater insight so that I can ask questions I didn't even think to be asking in the first place. So there's a real, I mean, we could probably talk for quite a long time around data sources and opportunities in terms of bringing data together. But I'll also just share another, it's sort of related to your question, which is with the pandemic, you can imagine all organizations, certainly in financial services, were the number of reports that were being required and requested was huge, right? So there was a huge amount of requirements coming in for reports on things that we maybe have always been looking at, but we had to look at it much more frequently because of the pandemic, or things we hadn't looked at before. And so it really brought to light a lot of opportunities to streamline reporting and make some strategic decisions about data sources and opportunities to combine data sources. I mean, we've been doing this for years, so it's not a new thing, but it's just another example of, I think those two, the way you flip the question is really interesting, because I think both approaches are in play. And when you look at those two things together, it can be really powerful.
Excellent. Adele, how about yourself?
Yeah, great question. Love it. What I would add actually to what Jennifer said is that I kind of look at data and analytics two parts. One is there's sort of the reporting that happens that measures what's important to the business. So typically KPIs or metrics. And that's something that sort of helps the business run, whether it's day to day or keep tabs of what's important. And that's more of the internal data, more structured data that comes out of the source systems within an organization. Then there's kind of this space that we're playing in right now, which is bringing in quite a bit of unstructured data as well as structured data, but it's IoT data. And that data right now, we're not really sure. So it's kind of two parts to it. One is a bit of exploratory, where we are going to sort of try to understand what's happening, analyze the data a bit more. And then, hopefully we will get some insights or determine some value through it. So the first piece of the internal stuff, kind of the business is driving the requirements for reporting because there's certain things it wants to manage. But then the data, because the data coming in from different sources could present opportunities for things to, decisions to be driven. Or another way to look at it, that I like to look at it, is how do you leverage that innovation? So, under the label of data innovation. So there's a lot of opportunity with this new data coming in and capability that's being introduced by it to kind of look at things a little bit differently and perhaps drive some decisions or innovations from a business point of view. I'll just
very good. Loved it. So Adele, I'm going to come back to you now. I'm going off on the fly here too. So you mentioned KPI a few times, right? Key performance indicators. Is OKRs something you guys are looking at from an objectives and key results, or a balanced scorecard with objectives? Because it's easy to have a KPI to find out profitability or whatever is important to your industry. But what about the why part? What are we going to put in place to meet those goals, and how successful are those components? Is that something you guys are looking at? Is that important to you?
The answer is yes. I think it's a great point that you're making, Chris. And I think the key point that underlies that from my perspective is it's about sort of the maturity of where the organization is and how can they handle some of that reporting and information needs. So I think what starts sort of at the first step of that is the KPIs. What's important? How do I measure it? But really, you got to go to the next step, which is determining is what you measure the right thing. And what are you missing by focusing on just that KPI? So I 100% agree. And I think that, to me, is the next step of evolution in terms of sort of that reporting maturity. So if you look at the gamut, we start with the basic reporting, and then you move all the way up to the higher level or sophistication of the artificial intelligence, machine learning, all that new capability that comes through as the data is available, as well as the technical capability there that marries up to it. But as people get comfortable with in understanding the reports, understanding sort of and getting used to that cadence of reports, then I think the next step is that gradual piece, which is kind of testing it, making sure you're actually monitoring or observing the right KPIs.
Excellent. Okay, wow, we're getting a lot of questions come in, so buckle up, ladies. Next question is from Eugene. I believe it's Eugene from Think Data Works, or Eugen. What strategy do you use to currently manage all of your data sources? Does it get overwhelming when these data sources grow, particularly with mergers and acquisitions, right? So Jennifer, let's start with you. What's your strategy to manage all of your data sources?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think many organizations, this is a big challenge. And a 150-plus-year-old bank, you can imagine, and other older organizations, there's a lot of data. We've tackled it in a few different ways. And I think for us, it comes down to some of the foundational pieces around data management, which I will put a plug in to say, if we don't continue to proactively invest in data management, we will start to hit a wall with analytics if we haven't already. And by we, I mean broadly across the data space. But I would say, we've done a lot of work around evaluating applications for cloud migrations. We've done a lot of work around evaluating all of our data sources in regards to records retention and data retention and disposition, making sure we keep data only as long as we should. And so that has started to create, we have inventories, of course, of our data sources, but looking at it holistically across the bank for the purposes of these other programs like data retention and disposition oversight, and also looking at opportunities to consolidate and to move to cloud as appropriate, are bringing more, I think, awareness and momentum behind what does it mean to have these different data sources, and where do we have opportunities to consolidate or redirect or make improvements to them. So I'd say it's always been a focus. There's always been investment, but there's kind of this more holistic look at it as a result of some of these other data management related programs.
Awesome. Adele, how about yourself real quick?
The short answer is yes, it is a challenge. And that's key in understanding your business priorities and associating the two. You have to prioritize because you can't get it all. It's bigger than a bread box. So
yeah, scope it out there.
Yeah.
No, and I think you guys would agree, right? When you talk about analytics and business intelligence and reporting and dashboards, all that's great, and there's plenty of vendors to look at, but you have to start with the data. It's your most valuable commodity. Can't be overlooked. Got to make sure that the data is accurate before you start looking at the pretty picture, right? I think we're out of time. A lot of questions were thrown at us, and we don't have time to get through all of them. Let me throw the ball back to James. James, are you there?
I am here. Thanks, Chris. So yes, as you say, Chris, we have had a lot of questions come in there, but unfortunately, we are out of time. So unfortunately, we won't be able to take all of them, but it shows how popular the panel was and how interesting a conversation I think that was. So thank you, Jennifer and Adele, for your contributions, and to you, Chris, for moderating, and to Information Builders as well for bringing us all together for that conversation. I thought it was very enlightening, and from all the questions that came through, I'm sure the audience agreed. If we didn't have time to tackle your question, I'm sure Chris and Adele and Jennifer would be happy if you reached out via LinkedIn and kind of maybe followed up on that channel to continue the conversation there. As unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you again to everyone for taking part in that.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Great.